A tiny face stares from a piece of ancient ivory, but it is not human. It has a beak where a nose should be, and the knowing eyes of a bear. This artifact is one of hundreds of strange carvings unearthed from the frozen ground of Alaska, created by a forgotten people called the Ipiutak. By the end of this, you will understand the profound mystery of why an entire civilization dedicated itself to carving creatures that never existed. We are going to explore a frozen metropolis and decode the visions of artists who worked over 1,000 years ago. What kind of world were they trying to show us, and why did their entire reality vanish without a trace? What do you see when you look into the eyes of a being that is part human, part animal, and part pure imagination? The year was 1939, and the world was on the brink of a different kind of darkness. Yet far to the north, on a narrow spit of land jutting into the Chukch, I see known as Point Hope, two archaeologists were about to make a discovery that would rewrite the story of the Arctic. Helge Larsen and Frole Rainey arrived expecting to find perhaps a few ancient dwellings, the remnants of a small hunting camp typical of the region. What they uncovered instead was nothing short of a city. Stretching across the tundra were not just a handful of ruins, but the distinct, sunken outlines of more than 600 house pits arranged in long, orderly rows. This was not a haphazard collection of shelters. It was a vast, deliberately planned settlement, a frozen metropolis that had once been home to 1,000 people or more. For the archaeological world, this scale was a profound shock. The conventional wisdom held that the ancient Arctic was a place of scarcity, where survival demanded small, nomadic groups constantly on the move. Point Hope shattered that idea. Here was evidence of a large, stable, and complex society that had thrived in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. The sheer number of houses spoke of social organization, of a community that could harvest enough food from the sea and the ice to sustain itself year-round. But the true wonder, the element that turned shock into awe, was the preservation. The perpetual cold of the Arctic ground, the permafrost, had acted as a perfect deep freeze. Wood, bone, and most importantly, ivory did not decay. They were waiting just as they had been left for over a millennium. As Larsen and Rainey carefully excavated, they began to pull from the soil not just tools and weapons, but art. Hundreds upon hundreds of carved ivory objects emerged, each one a window into a lost world. They had come looking for the bones of a village, and they had found its beating heart. These ivory carvings did not belong to the people we know today as the Inuit. The artists were their mysterious predecessors, a culture archaeologists named the Ipiutak. They flourished in northwest Alaska for nearly 1,000 years, from roughly 100 years before the Common Era to around 800 years after. That is an astonishing span of time, longer than the Roman Empire lasted. For centuries, they built the orderly rows of semi-subterranean houses at Point Hope and other sites, mastering the brutal Arctic environment with a technology that was both elegant and deadly effective. Their survival depended on the sea. They were not caribou hunters of the inland tundra, but lords of the ice and the waves, pursuing bowhead whales, walrus, and seals with harpoons of stunning complexity. The engineering in their hunting gear reveals a deep, practical intelligence, every component designed for maximum efficiency in a world where failure meant starvation. This makes the nature of their art all the more bewildering. In a culture so intimately tied to the tangible realities of survival, you would expect their artwork to reflect that world. You might find carvings of the whales they revered or the seals they depended on, but the Ipiutak artists turned almost entirely away from that. While they left behind mountains of practical tools, the objects they chose to decorate with profound artistic effort were rarely utilitarian. Instead, they poured their skill into a separate, parallel world of imagery. They created what scholars call ceremonial or ritual art, objects that seem to serve no physical purpose but a spiritual or symbolic one. This is the central paradox of the Ipiutak. They were supremely practical materialists who built a thriving civilization, yet they channeled their creative spirit almost exclusively into the surreal, the ceremonial, and the inexplicable. They succeeded in the real world, but their art suggests their minds were fixated on another one entirely. And then, centuries before the ancestors of modern Inuit arrived, the Ipiutak and their entire culture simply vanished from the archaeological record, leaving no clear descendants, only their strange ivory ghosts behind. The heart of the mystery lies in a collection of over 200 small, meticulously carved objects. They are made primarily from walrus ivory, a material both beautiful and durable, requiring immense patience and skill to shape. The artists did not just carve simple figures, they practiced a form of sculpture called open work, where they would painstakingly cut away the ivory to create delicate, lace-like patterns. They engraved intricate lines onto surfaces, and sometimes they even inlaid pieces with other materials, adding contrasting color and texture. The craftsmanship is undeniable, a testament to generations of refined artistic tradition. But the subject matter is where reality fractures. These are not carvings of the walrus that provided the ivory, or the whales they hunted, or the bears they respected. Look closely and the familiar world dissolves. A human face stares back at you, but its mouth is a sharp, toothy beak. A body has the limbs of a land mammal, yet it ends in the tail flukes of a sea creature. Some figures combine multiple animal traits into a single, impossible anatomy, while others are adorned with patterns that look less organic and more like geometric symbols or the segmented armor of an insect. This is a bestiary of beings that never walked the earth or swam the sea. We can categorize them into broad, unsettling families: the human-animal hybrids that seem to gaze with a knowing, otherworldly intelligence, the animal-animal blends that defy the natural order, and the utterly abstract forms that resist any classification at all. This leads us to the single driving question at the core of the Ipiutak enigma. In a culture of supremely practical survivors, why would they dedicate such extraordinary effort and skill to creating an entire world of impossible creatures? What profound purpose did this bizarre artistic tradition serve? To understand their vision, we must look directly at the beings they carved. The first and perhaps most haunting category is the human-animal fusion. Picture a face that is undeniably human in its structure, with eyes that hold a familiar depth, but where the nose and mouth should be, there is instead the curved, sharp beak of a bird of prey. Or a human head crowned not with hair but with the branching antlers of a caribou. These are not masks being worn. The carving style suggests these features are part of the being itself, grown from the flesh. We see humanoid bodies, but their arms might end in the paws of a bear, or their backs sprout the suggestion of wings. The ambiguity is intentional and profound. Are we looking at a shaman in the midst of a spiritual transformation, his soul taking on the attributes of a powerful animal guide? Or are these depictions of the gods and spirits the Ipiutak believed in, entities who existed in a permanent state of hybrid power, bridging the realms of human, land, and sky? The carvings refuse to tell us, leaving us to wonder if we're seeing a moment of becoming or a portrait of a permanent divine being. Then the artists took the concept further, stitching together the animal kingdom itself into new creations. These are the animal chimeras, creatures that would never share a family tree in our world. A single body might possess the heavy head and shoulders of a bear, the sleek torso of a wolf, and end in the tail flukes of a whale. Another might have the body of a land mammal, but a head that unmistakably belongs to a walrus, complete with long tusks. Bird beaks are attached to four-legged creatures, and serpentine forms coil where they shouldn't. These are not random combinations, but deliberate syntheses of the most potent attributes from the Arctic world: the strength of the bear, the endurance of the walrus, the vision of the bird, all fused into a single supreme entity. It is as if the Ipiutak were trying to visualize the ultimate spirit of the hunt, or the master of all the animals, by literally assembling it from the parts of its subjects. Most mysterious of all are the carvings that abandon realism entirely, venturing into pure abstraction. Here we find beings whose bodies are not made of flesh and bone, but of patterns. A face might be dominated by a single large spiral eye that seems to pull the viewer into a vortex. A body is represented not by limbs, but by a series of concentric circles, like ripples on a pond or the layers of the cosmos. Appendages do not end in paws or claws, but in clean geometric shapes, squares or sharp angles. These entities feel less like creatures and more like diagrams, like maps of energy or symbols of cosmic principles given a vague, bodily form. They represent a leap from representing the known world to encoding ideas about the structure of reality itself. When an Ipiutak artist held one of these abstract pieces, what did they see? Was it a schematic for a spiritual journey, a symbol of regeneration, or the portrait of a force so alien it could only be shown through geometry. This progression from human hybrid to animal chimera to abstract symbol shows a culture thinking in layers, using art not to mirror life, but to explore the very architecture of existence, both seen and unseen. Among this gallery of the uncanny, one piece stands apart, a masterpiece so compelling it has become the unofficial symbol of the entire lost culture. It is often called the Ipiutak mask, though it is far too small to ever cover a human face. Carved from a single piece of dark, rich walrus ivory, it is a haunting visage you could cradle in the palm of your hand. The face is undeniably human in its oval shape, yet every feature is subtly, deliberately altered. The eyes are narrow slits angled sharply upward, giving an expression of intense, otherworldly focus. The mouth is a simple, straight line, neither smiling nor frowning, a mask of serene neutrality, but it is the nose that dominates and transforms the entire piece. It is not a nose at all, but a long, smooth, downward curving beak, as sharp and defined as that of an eagle or a hawk. This is not a human wearing a bird mask, the carving insists. This is a being for whom the beak is its true face. Adding to the mystery are a series of tiny, perfectly drilled holes. They rim the forehead and dot the cheeks in a symmetrical pattern. For decades, scholars have wondered what these held. Were they sockets for delicate ivory plugs that have since fallen out, creating a dotted pattern on the skin? Or perhaps they held small, stiff feathers, radiating like a sunburst or a halo around this hybrid face, adding movement and life to the static ivory. The craftsmanship is breathtaking. The lines are clean and confident. The surface is polished to a smooth luster by hands that knew the material intimately. This was no casual doodle, it was a revered object, an icon. So what was it? One compelling theory is that it is a maskette, a small ritual object not meant for wearing, but for holding, perhaps by a shaman during a ceremony. It could be a portrait of the shaman's own transforming spirit, his soul taking on the keen sight and soaring freedom of a bird. Alternatively, it might represent a specific spirit guide or deity, a permanent resident of the otherworld who always appears in this hybrid form. Some have even suggested it was part of a larger ceremonial costume, perhaps attached to a headdress or a parka, serving as a focal point of spiritual power. Whatever its precise use, the Ipiutak mask condenses the entire mystery into one palm-sized enigma. It demonstrates that their surreal art was not the product of primitive confusion, but of a sophisticated symbolic language, where every curve, every angle, and every empty hole was filled with meaning we can only struggle to hear across the centuries. Beyond the startling forms of the creatures themselves lies a second, quieter language, scratched into the ivory with a precision that speaks of ritual, not decoration, or patterns that repeat again and again. The most powerful of these is the spiral. You find it everywhere. A single graceful coil might serve as the entire eye of a hybrid being, a vortex where a pupil should be. It is engraved along the spine of an animal, as if mapping the path of its life force. Sometimes it appears alone, a solitary symbol carved on a plaque or tool handle. This was not random ornamentation. In cultures across the ancient world, the spiral is a near-universal symbol of motion and transition. It can represent the cyclical journey of life, death, and rebirth, the uncoiling of spring after the long winter, or the inward path of a shaman's vision quest. For the Ipiutak living in a world of extreme seasonal change, the spiral may have embodied the very turning of their universe. More specifically, many researchers see it as a symbol of transformation, the visible sign of a spirit moving from one state to another, or perhaps a doorway, a vortex between the world of the living and the world of the spirits that their carvings seem to inhabit. When you see a spiral where an eye should be, you are not looking at a creature that sees as we do. You are looking at a being that perceives the flow of energy and the layers of reality directly. Equally common is the dot and circle motif, a central point, often a deeply drilled hole, surrounded by one or more perfectly engraved concentric circles. This pattern frequently marks the joints of these impossible animals, the shoulders, hips, and knees, but it also appears as eyes staring out from abstract faces. What does this mean on a practical level? A joint is a point of movement, of pivotal change in direction. Symbolically, marking it so prominently could indicate a center of spiritual power or a point where different energies within the being connect. As an eye, the dot and circle transforms sight into something more profound. It is not an organ for viewing the physical world, but a lens focused on the spiritual one, a symbol of inner vision or cosmic awareness. The integration of these patterns is what reveals a true symbolic system. The Ipiutak artists did not simply create a strange creature and then add decoration as an afterthought. The form and the pattern were conceived as one. A bare walrus chimera is not complete without the spiral along its flank, the dot and circle at its shoulders. These motifs are the wiring diagram within the sculpture, the visual code that explains the creature's nature and power. They tell us that the being is in a state of transformation, that it sees between worlds, that its very joints are hubs of mystical energy. This transforms the art from being merely representational, however bizarre, to being deeply cosmological. Each carving is a compacted myth, a frozen story, where the shape of the body and the symbols on its surface work together to describe a complete philosophy of a universe alive with interconnected, transforming spirits. The ivory is not just a medium, it is a page, and on it is written a language we are only beginning to sound out. If these carvings are a language, then shamanism is the most compelling key we have to translate them. Across the globe, from the frozen tundra to the deepest rainforest, a remarkably similar spiritual practice has emerged independently. This is the world of the shaman, a part-time priest, part-time healer, and full-time traveler between realities. The core belief is that our visible world is just one layer of existence, interwoven with a spirit world that is just as real and far more powerful. The shaman's unique role is to journey into that other realm. Through intense rituals involving rhythmic drumming, chanting, dancing, or fasting, they enter a trance state, a waking dream where the boundaries of the self dissolve. In this altered state of consciousness, they believe their soul leaves their body to navigate the spirit landscape. Their mission is to negotiate with the forces there, to retrieve lost souls of the sick, to divine the location of game, or to learn the causes of misfortune. To navigate this perilous journey, they need guides. This is where the animal helpers come in. A shaman might form a lifelong bond with the spirit of a bear, a wolf, or a bird, entities who lend their strength, their cunning, or their far-seeing vision. Most crucially, during the trance, the shaman does not just meet these spirits, they can become them. They experience a visceral, psychic transformation, feeling their own arms become powerful paws, their sight sharpen into a hawk's gaze, their voice issue forth as a growl. They are not pretending in the depth of the vision, they are the hybrid being. Now look again at the Ipiutak carvings with this lens. That human face with the beak is not a strange god, it is a portrait of the shaman mid-transformation, his soul wearing the aspect of his raptor guide. The bare walrus chimera is not a monster, it is a composite spirit helper, a fusion of terrestrial might and oceanic mastery encountered in the layered realities of the trance. The abstract forms with spiral eyes and geometric bodies, those could be maps of the spirit world itself, diagrams of energy flows, or portraits of the foundational spirits that have no earthly counterpart. This interpretation is strengthened by striking parallels from other shamanic cultures, the transformative masks of the Pacific Northwest tribes, the animal spirit imagery in Siberian shamanic regalia, even the hybrid beings in the cave art of prehistoric Europe, all point to a shared human impulse to visualize the journey beyond the flesh. For the Ipiutak, living in a world of stark survival, the spirit realm was not an escape, it was a necessary partner. The shaman's voyage ensured the whales would return, the seals would be plentiful, and the community would endure. The ivory carvings then were likely more than art, they were tools of power. A small figure might have been a shaman's personal amulet, a pocket-sized embodiment of his guiding spirit. A more complex open-work piece could have been used in rituals, its intricate patterns catching the flicker of firelight to mimic the shimmering instability of the spirit world. They were anchors for memory, teaching aids for apprentices, or perhaps even passports, objects that help the shaman focus his intent and find his way back to a specific realm or spirit. This theory answers the great why. It gives a profound purpose to the surreal imagery, but it also opens a deeper, more unsettling line of inquiry. If these are records of visions, what exactly were the Ipiutak shamans seeing, and what were they using to see it? The shamanic theory paints a vivid and logical picture, but it is not the final word. In archaeology, a single compelling answer can sometimes blind us to other possibilities. and the Ipiutak carvings are too strange, too varied to be confined to just one interpretation. Other scholars look at these objects and ask different questions. Could they be something far more mundane, yet equally vital to the culture? Perhaps they were not tools for trance, but tools for teaching. In a society without a written language, how do you pass down complex stories, genealogies, or moral codes? You illustrate them. Each hybrid creature might not be a spirit guide, but a character in an epic myth, a frozen moment from a story about the creation of the world or the adventures of ancestral heroes. The bear walrus chimera could be the protagonist of a legend about the first hunt, a being who brokered a pact between land and sea. The abstract forms might not be energy maps, but symbolic representations of clans or family lineages, their geometric patterns serving as a kind of heraldry. In this view, the carvings are a library, a physical archive of the Ipiutak's intellectual and narrative world, held in the hand and explained aloud by a storyteller by the fire. Another practical theory suggests these were not sacred objects at all, but ritual toys or ceremonial game pieces. Some of the smaller, more robust figures have a tactile, handheld quality. Could they have been used in a divination game, thrown like dice to predict the outcome of a hunt? Might they have been pawns in a complex board game that mimicked a spiritual journey, their different hybrid forms granting various powers on a symbolic landscape? Even if used in play, the game itself could have held deep ritual significance, a way to interact with the forces of fate and fortune. Then there are the more speculative, controversial ideas that push at the boundaries of conventional archaeology. A handful of researchers have looked at the strange combinations and wondered about genetic memory, the faint inherited recollection of creatures from a deep past. Could the Ipiutak's visions have been unconsciously shaped by ancestral memories of the Pleistocene, of a time when mammoths and giant short-faced bears roamed the same land? The carvings would not be portraits of those animals, but dreamlike distortions of them, surfacing from a collective subconscious. Others propose the even more fringe idea of encounters with rare, now extinct hybrid animals, though this is widely dismissed by scientists. What these alternative theories reveal is a vibrant, ongoing debate. There is no consensus, and that is the sign of a truly great mystery. The field is alive with questions. Are we looking at a shaman's toolkit, a storyteller's visual aids, or the rulebook for a forgotten sacred game? The evidence is silent on this point, and it forces us to confront a humbling reality. We can analyze the ivory, map the sites, and compare the symbols, but we cannot hear the stories that gave these objects life. We are left with the artifacts in our own imaginations, trying to bridge a gap of over 1,000 years. This healthy debate is not a failure of archaeology, it is its very engine. It means the Ipiutak are still speaking to us, not with answers, but with an invitation to wonder. So what do you think they are? Among the most breathtaking of all Ipiutak creations are objects that seem to defy the very material they are made from. These are the openwork plaques, flat panels of walrus ivory transformed into something as delicate as lace. Picture a rectangle, perhaps the size of your hand, but instead of being solid, it is a complex web of ivory. The artist has painstakingly sawed, drilled, and carved away everything that is not part of the design, leaving behind a fragile framework of interconnected lines and shapes. And within that framework, the familiar strangeness unfolds. The silhouette of a beaked human might form the central figure, its body defined by the empty space around it. Geometric patterns like interconnected spirals or ladder-like forms weave around the creature, binding it into the composition. These are not quick sketches, they are masterpieces of patience and planning, where one wrong cut could shatter weeks of work. Their extreme fragility is the first and greatest clue to their purpose. You could not use this as a tool handle, it would snap. You would not give it to a child as a toy. This object was made to be seen, to be held carefully, perhaps to be worn or displayed in a context where it was protected. So what were they for? One compelling idea is that they were ceremonial pendants, worn by a shaman or a person of high status during important rituals. Suspended from a cord around the neck, the plaque would lie flat against the chest, a shimmering, intricate emblem of spiritual authority. The play of light through its open spaces would have been mesmerizing, especially in the flickering glow of a seal oil lamp inside a semi-dark house, making the depicted spirit seem to flicker in and out of our reality. Alternatively, these plaques might have been sewn onto a ceremonial parka or headdress, becoming part of a ritual costume that transformed the wearer into a walking vision, a mobile tapestry of spiritual power. Each step, each movement would cause the delicate ivory to shift, bringing the hybrid creatures and cosmic patterns to life. Some researchers look at the complex, interconnected designs and propose an even more profound function. Could these be maps, not maps of the physical tundra, but schematic diagrams of the spirit world itself? The central figure might represent the shaman or a guiding spirit, and the geometric pathways radiating from it could chart the routes of a visionary journey, the layers of the cosmos, or the connections between different realms of existence. In this reading, the plaque is not just a picture, it is a navigational aid for the soul. This interpretation finds a startling echo far from Alaska. In other shamanic cultures, particularly among some indigenous groups of Siberia, we find remarkably similar objects known as spirit boards or soul maps. These are flat panels, often of wood or metal, engraved with schematic representations of the spirit world, used by shamans to guide their journeys or to illustrate the path of a soul. The Ipiutak openwork plaques, with their blend of figurative and geometric elements, fit this pattern perfectly. They feel like a physical calculus for the invisible. Their existence pushes us to accept that the Ipiutak mystical practice was not a vague collection of beliefs, but a highly developed, structured system. The time, skill, and cultural value invested in creating something so beautiful yet so useless for daily survival speaks volumes. It tells us that for the Ipiutak, engaging with the spirit world was not a casual hobby. It was an essential, structured, and deeply artistic endeavor, as vital to their survival in the cosmos as a sharp harpoon was to their survival on the ice. Look into the eyes of an Ipiutak carving and you may feel a chill of recognition. They are watching you. Across hundreds of these ivory beings, the artists lavished an extraordinary, obsessive attention on the eyes, transforming them from simple features into portals of power. On many figures, the eyes are not merely carved, they are inlaid. The artist would carefully drill out 2 small sockets, then press into them tiny discs of contrasting material. Some use jet, a deep, glossy black stone that absorbs light. Others use pieces of differently colored ivory, creating a pale, milky stare against the darker tusk. This technical choice had a profound effect. It gave the eyes a literal depth, a 3-dimensional quality that made them seem to catch the light independently from the rest of the face. In the shifting glow of an oil lamp, these inlaid eyes would appear to glint, to move, to follow you across the room. They are not the eyes of a statue, they are the eyes of a presence. But the artists went further into the surreal. On countless other carvings, they abandoned realistic eyes entirely. In their place, they engraved a single, continuous spiral. A tight coil sits where a pupil should be, turning the socket into a hypnotic vortex. This spiral eye does not see the physical world. It seems to perceive the flow of energy, the turning of seasons, or the inward journey of a trance. It is an eye designed for viewing the architecture of the spirit realm. Even more unsettling are the creatures blessed or cursed with multiple sets of eyes. A single animal head might bear 3, 4, or even more pairs, arranged in rows along its brow or cheeks. What kind of being needs to see in so many directions at once? This is not a biological adaptation, it is a spiritual one. It signifies an all-seeing awareness, a consciousness that perceives the ordinary world, the spirit world, and the connections between them simultaneously. It is the visual signature of a guardian spirit or a deity that misses nothing. The psychological effect of this emphasis is unmistakable and intentional. These objects do not sit passively on a shelf, they engage. They impose a relationship. You are not just observing an artifact, you are being observed by it. This creates a powerful, eerie intimacy, collapsing the distance between the modern viewer and the ancient artist's intent. It forces a question, not about what the thing is, but about who it is for. The consistent message in those gazes is one of alive, conscious power. In countless human cultures, eyes are windows to the soul, the one feature we instinctively search for signs of life, intelligence, and intent. By making the eyes the focal point, the Ipiutak artists were declaring that these were not mere representations, they were vessels. The inlay gave them a physical soul, the spirals gave them cosmic sight, and the multiple sets gave them omnipresent awareness. A carving with such eyes was not a picture of a spirit, it was a housing for it, a point of contact where that conscious power could intersect with the human world. To hold such an object was to hold a gaze across the centuries, to feel the weight of a silent, waiting intelligence that understood the world in ways we have long forgotten. The gaze of those ivory eyes seems to look not just at us, but toward a distant horizon. To truly understand the Ipiutak vision, we must follow that gaze westward, across the 55 miles of open water and shifting pack ice that separate Alaska from Siberia. This stretch, the Bering Strait, is not a barrier but a bridge, one that has been crossed for millennia. When we look at the art of the peoples living on the Siberian coast and the small islands in the strait during the same centuries, a startling pattern emerges. The Ipiutak were not alone in their surreal creations. To their west flourished the old Bering Sea and Arctic cultures, master ivory carvers in their own right. And their artwork speaks a strikingly similar visual language. They too carved complex openwork plaques with intricate lace-like patterns. They too depicted hybrid beings, blending human and animal traits into forms that defy nature. Most tellingly, they used identical symbolic motifs. The spiral, that universal sign of transformation, appears with the same prominence. The dot and circle, marking joints and eyes, is a shared signature. There is even a specific enigmatic form called the winged object, a stylized carving that looks like a bird in flight or perhaps a ritual dart that appears in nearly identical styles on both sides of the strait. The similarities are too precise, too deeply embedded in artistic grammar to be mere coincidence. This is not a case of one culture vaguely influencing another. It is evidence of a shared artistic and spiritual dialect. For generations, scholars have pieced together a picture of a vibrant circumpolar network. The Bering Sea, even in winter, was a highway, not a wall. Travel by skin boat in summer and by dog sled across the frozen ice in winter was not only possible, it was routine. These were not isolated villages staring out at an empty sea. They were connected communities engaged in trade, marriage alliances, and the exchange of ideas. Ivory, obsidian, and rare materials moved along these routes, but the most profound cargo was intangible: the stories, the rituals, and the visions that gave shape to the art. What we are likely seeing is a vast, interconnected Arctic shamanistic art tradition. This framework transforms the Ipiutak from an isolated artistic anomaly into a brilliant, distinctive node within a much wider web of belief. Imagine a constellation of cultures, each with its own local flavor and emphasis, yet all participating in a common conversation about the nature of reality, spirit, and transformation. The Ipiutak, with their sprawling settlement at Point Hope, may have been a major center, a place where this shared symbolic language was refined to an extraordinary degree of sophistication and scale. Their particular genius might have been in the intensity of their focus, taking the common motifs and pushing them into new realms of complexity and abstraction. This connection solves one mystery while deepening another. It explains where the artistic vocabulary came from, grounding it in a real historical context of exchange. But it also raises a profound question about the network itself. What was the source of this shared vision? Was there an even older, common ancestral culture from which all these traditions sprang? Or was the similarity born from a shared human response to the same immense, demanding landscape, a place where the line between life and death was so thin that the spirit world felt intimately close? The ice bridge allowed the ideas to travel, but the ideas themselves seemed to have sprung from the very soul of the Arctic. The sheer sophistication of these carvings forces us to ask a practical question about the people who held the tools. Who had the time? Consider the process of creating just one openwork plaque. First, a section of raw walrus tusk must be harvested, soaked, and carefully split. Then, using stone abrasives and perhaps copper gravers, the artist would painstakingly sketch the design onto the ivory surface. The real work begins with the drilling, using a bow drill to create a series of tiny starter holes. Then, with a fine blade, likely made of slate, they would saw out the intricate negative spaces, a task demanding immense patience and a steady hand, where a single slip could destroy weeks of effort. Finally, the entire piece would be polished with leather and fine grit until it gleamed. This is not the work of an evening by the fire after a long day of hunting. This is the labor of a specialist, a master artisan who has spent years, perhaps a lifetime, perfecting this exacting craft. The existence of hundreds of such objects, many displaying a consistent, high-level artistic style, points unmistakably to a class of dedicated craftspeople within Ipiutak society. This simple fact reveals something profound about their world. For specialists to exist, the community must produce enough surplus food to support them. While the artisan is spending months carving a spirit plaque, someone else must be out on the ice, successfully hunting enough seal and walrus to feed both the hunter's family and the carver's family. This indicates a level of social organization and economic stability that far exceeds mere survival. It suggests a society with roles, with a division of labor that allowed for the flourishing of spiritual artistry. So who were these artists and what was their place in the community? One compelling possibility is that the carvers and the shamans were one and the same. In many shamanic traditions, the act of creating a ritual object is itself a sacred process, a form of meditation and invocation. The shaman, in a state of focused intent, might carve the very spirit he encounters in his visions, binding its essence into the ivory as he works. The object becomes an extension of his own power, a physical anchor for his spiritual relationships. In this scenario, the artist is not a mere technician, but a visionary, translating his direct experiences into a tangible form for the community. The other possibility is a partnership. Perhaps there was a class of highly skilled, non-shamanic artisans who worked under the direct guidance of the spiritual leaders. A master shaman, after a profound vision, might describe the being he saw, a human with a beak and spiral eyes, to a master carver who would then use his technical genius to materialize that description. This implies a collaborative spiritual economy where different forms of expertise, the seer and the maker, combine to create the tools of the sacred. Were these carvers revered or were they simply skilled laborers? The evidence leans toward reverence. The materials they used, walrus ivory, were precious, the product of dangerous and respected hunts. To entrust such valuable material to an artist implies great trust and high status. The objects they produced were not traded for meat or tools. They were kept within the community for ritual use, central to the society's most important ceremonies. It is difficult to imagine the hands that shaped these portals to the spirit world being seen as ordinary. More likely, the master carver occupied a unique and respected niche, a bridge between the physical skill of the hunter and the metaphysical insight of the shaman. They were the scribes of a silent religion, the engineers of the intangible. By recognizing them, we stop seeing the Ipiutak as a faceless, mysterious culture and start to see individuals. We see a young apprentice, his fingers raw from learning to polish, watching his master outline a spiral. We see an elder carver, her eyes still sharp, selecting the perfect piece of ivory to capture the strange new spirit the shaman described. They had names, families, and pride in their work. They were the human heartbeat behind the ivory enigma, and their dedicated lives tell us that for the Ipiutak, engaging with the unseen world was not a peripheral concern. It was a central, organized, and richly supported pillar of their civilization. Every piece of ivory began with a hunt, a confrontation with one of the most formidable creatures in the Arctic. The Pacific walrus is a beast of immense power, a bull weighing over a ton, armed with tusks that can reach 3 feet in length, and possessed of a thick, blubber-armored hide. To pursue it was not a casual undertaking. It was a supreme test of skill and courage, undertaken from fragile skin boats in the icy, unpredictable waters of the Chukchi Sea. The hunt was a coordinated ballet of danger. Hunters would approach silently, paddling their umiaks close to a resting herd on an ice floe. A successful strike with a harpoon was only the beginning, for a wounded walrus could easily capsize a boat, dragging men into the freezing sea with a thrash of its massive head. This was not merely a procurement mission for food and blubber, which were vital. It was a direct engagement with a powerful spirit of the ocean. In the worldview of northern peoples, the walrus was not just an animal. It was a conscious being, a person of the sea, who gave itself to worthy hunters. To take its life required respect, ritual, and reciprocity. The hunt itself was a sacred contract, the first step in a long process of transformation. Once the immense creature was brought to shore, the work of reverence continued. The community would carefully butcher the walrus, ensuring every part was used, from the nutrient-rich meat and sustaining blubber to the tough hide for boat covers and ropes. But the tusks were handled with particular care. They were not simply hacked out. They were extracted thoughtfully, often as a complete pair, from the upper jaw of the animal. These raw, curved columns of dentine, still stained and organic, were the ultimate prize. They were then cleaned and cured, sometimes buried in the earth or stored in a cool, dry place to season, to prevent them from cracking as they dried. This curing process could take months, a period of patient waiting. Finally, the master carver would receive the precious material. With stone saws and abrasives, they would begin the slow work of reducing the massive tusk into manageable blanks, cutting cross-sections or splitting long pieces. In this very act, we see the profound symbolic loop that defines Ipiutak artistry. The hunter, through a sacred and dangerous pact, takes the spirit of the walrus from the sea. The carver then receives this physical piece of that spirit, the tusk, and through weeks of focused labor, transforms it, but they do not transform it back into an image of the walrus itself. Instead, they use the essence of the ocean spirit to give form to a completely different kind of being, a human-bird hybrid or a bear-whale chimera. The walrus spirit, in a sense, is transmuted. Its physical substance becomes the vessel for a new composite consciousness. This connects the brutally practical world of survival on the ice to the highest flights of spiritual imagination. The tusk is a bridge. It carries the power and sacrifice of the hunt into the heart of the ritual object. When a shaman held a finished carving, he was not just holding a piece of art. He was holding a chain of transformations, the spirit of the walrus, the skill of the hunter, the vision of the artist, and the power of the otherworldly being, all fused into one small, cold, impossibly intricate form. The mundane act of sourcing material was from the very start a magical act. That chain of transformation from hunt to tusk to spirit all happened within a specific window of time, a window we can now measure with startling precision. To understand the scale of their achievement, we need to know when the Ipiutak lived, and for that, science provides a key. Archaeologists turn to a technique called radiocarbon dating. All living things absorb a tiny, consistent amount of a radioactive form of carbon from the atmosphere. When the organism dies, that absorption stops, and the radioactive carbon begins to decay at a steady, predictable rate. By measuring how much is left in a sample, scientists can calculate how long ago that organism died. At Point Hope and other Ipiutak sites, the perfect conditions of the permafrost preserved a treasure trove of datable material. Researchers didn't date the ivory carvings directly, as the process can be destructive. Instead, they tested organic materials found in the same clear context as the art. They took samples from ancient hearths inside the houses, fragments of seal bone from meal leftovers, pieces of wood from house frames or tool handles, and even bits of walrus bone from the trash middens. These materials all stopped absorbing carbon on the day they were used or discarded by an Ipiutak person. The results from hundreds of such tests have painted a remarkably consistent picture. The Ipiutak culture flourished for nearly 1,000 years, from roughly 100 years before the Common Era to around 800 years after. This time frame is crucial. It means their artistic tradition was not a brief, fleeting experiment. It was sustained across generations, perhaps 30 or more, with master carvers teaching apprentices and spiritual ideas being refined and passed down over centuries. The peak of their artistic output, the period when the most complex open work and the most surreal hybrids were created, likely occurred in the middle of this span, perhaps around 500 years after the Common Era. This long duration deepens the mystery of their disappearance, for a culture that was so stable for so long does not simply evaporate without a cause. Dating the ivory itself presents a unique challenge. While the animal died centuries ago, the ivory tusk could have been curated, traded, and saved for generations before an artist finally decided to carve it. A finished piece could be younger than the material it's made from. This is why archaeologists rely on context, dating the wood found on the same house floor as the carving, which gives the last time that floor was occupied. So where does this place them in human history? It is vital to clarify that the Ipiutak were not prehistoric in the sense of cave dwellers living alongside mammoths. Their golden age coincided with the height of the Roman Empire, the Maya civilization in Mesoamerica, and the Han Dynasty in China. While those cultures were building stone monuments and writing on parchment, the Ipiutak were building a different kind of legacy in ivory, creating a metaphysical empire of the mind on the roof of the world. This context makes their story not one of primitive mystery, but of sophisticated parallel development. They were contemporaries of what we traditionally call the ancient world, yet they followed a path so utterly distinct it feels alien. Their enigma is not born from a lack of complexity, but from a complexity directed inward into a spiritual landscape we are still struggling to map. Knowing exactly when they lived only sharpens the central question: if they were so advanced, so stable, and so deeply connected to a vision of the world, what could have possibly made that vision go dark? Their world, so vibrant for centuries, simply stops. Around 800 years after the Common Era, the meticulous rows of houses at Point Hope fall silent. The hearths grow cold and no new carvings are placed in the earth. The Ipiutak, as a distinct culture, vanished from the archaeological record. This is not a gradual fade, but a relatively abrupt end to a way of life that had endured for nearly a millennium. The last radiocarbon dates from their settlements cluster around this time, and then there is nothing. Their unique artistic vision, that profound language of hybrid creatures and cosmic patterns, disappears with them. It leaves no direct descendants, no clear artistic lineage leading to the cultures that followed. This final silence is perhaps the most haunting part of their story, amplifying the feeling that we are looking at the artifacts of a self-contained world, a bowl of imagination that popped and left no echo. So what happened? What could extinguish a civilization so resilient and so deeply rooted in its vision of reality? Archaeologists have pieced together several plausible theories, each a piece of a very cold puzzle. The first and most compelling suspect is the climate. The Arctic is a system of exquisite sensitivity, where a shift of just a few degrees can rewrite the rules of survival. Around the time of the Ipiutak disappearance, evidence from ice cores and other proxies suggests the region may have entered a period of increased cold and storminess, a precursor to the broader climatic dip often called the Little Ice Age. For people utterly dependent on predictable sea ice and the migration patterns of marine mammals, this could have been catastrophic. Thicker, more persistent ice could have made walrus and seal hunting dangerously difficult, while shifting currents might have pushed the vital bowhead whale populations away from their traditional hunting grounds. A few bad seasons in a row could strain any society, but a sustained climatic shift could unravel the very fabric of their surplus economy, the surplus that supported their master carvers and complex rituals. Another possibility is that they succeeded too well. The very stability of their large, settled communities might have led to local resource depletion. Over centuries of intensive hunting from a single, massive settlement like Point Hope, the populations of walrus and seals in the immediate area could have been stressed. Unlike more nomadic groups, the Ipiutak could not simply move their entire city to follow the game. They were anchored to their investment in infrastructure, their houses and community structures. Depleting their local resource base would have forced a terrible choice: stay and starve or abandon their home and disperse. Could conflict have played a role? While there is little direct evidence of warfare in their remains, such as fortified sites or masses of weapons trauma, pressure from other groups is a real possibility. Around this same time, the ancestors of the modern Inuit, known to archaeologists as the Thule culture, were beginning their great migration eastward from Alaska across the Arctic. These new people were also supremely adapted hunters with advanced technology like the large open umiak and the dog sled. They may have moved into territories the Ipiutak relied upon, competing for the same scarce resources in a deteriorating environment. The outcome might not have been a war of extermination, but rather a process of absorption or assimilation. The Ipiutak, their society stressed by climate and scarcity, might have gradually intermarried and integrated with the incoming Thule groups, losing their distinct cultural identity over a few generations. This theory is seductive, but it faces one enormous silent objection: the art. If the Ipiutak were simply absorbed, why did their breathtaking artistic tradition not continue in some hybrid form? The Thule were also magnificent ivory carvers, but their style is different, often more representational and focused on the animals of the hunt. The Ipiutak's surreal, symbolic language of transformation appears nowhere in Thule art. It is as if the vision itself died, not just the people. This suggests their disappearance was not a peaceful merger, but a true cultural collapse, where the specific spiritual worldview that fueled those carvings could no longer be sustained. Perhaps the shaman's visions grew dark, or the spirits in a time of famine stopped speaking. The artists, with no one to feed them, put down their tools for the last time. The houses emptied, and the wind swept over the point, leaving only the ivory eyes of their impossible creatures to watch the long twilight settle in. The silence of the Ipiutak is not absolute, for modern science is learning to listen in new ways. Today, the investigation continues not just with shovels, but with scanners and spectrometers, offering a microscopic view into the world of the ancient carvers. One of the most powerful new tools is high-resolution, three-dimensional scanning. This technology can create a perfect digital replica of an ivory carving, capturing details far finer than the human eye can see. Researchers can then examine this digital model from any angle, zooming in to study the individual tool marks left by the artist. The direction and depth of a cut can reveal the sequence of the carving, showing whether the artist worked from the center outward or defined the silhouette first. More importantly, scientists can analyze microscopic wear patterns, the tiny polishings and abrasions that accumulate on the surface of an object from handling. Is the wear concentrated on a specific edge, suggesting it was frequently gripped, or is it evenly distributed, hinting it was worn against clothing as a pendant? This forensic analysis moves us beyond guessing about an object's purpose, allowing us to see the physical evidence of its life in human hands. Another frontier is residue analysis. Using sensitive chemical tests, scientists can scour the microscopic pores and crevices of these carvings for traces of substances invisible for centuries. They search for the faintest residues of pigments, which would tell us these stark white figures were once painted with vibrant red ochre or black charcoal, transforming them into even more vivid spiritual beings. They look for organic residues, perhaps traces of blood or animal fat, which could indicate an object was anointed or used in a sacrificial rite. Even the chemical signature of human skin oils preserved in the permafrost could be detected, confirming how an object was held. Perhaps the most tantalizing future possibility lies in the material itself. Advanced DNA analysis is now sensitive enough to extract genetic material from ancient ivory. In theory, scientists could sample a carving and match its DNA to a database of genetic profiles from walrus populations, both ancient and modern. This could answer profound questions about Ipiutak territory and trade. Did the ivory come from a local herd hunted near Point Hope, or was it traded from a distant coast in Siberia, physically linking the carving to that cross-strait artistic network? Could we trace the journey of a single tusk from the animal's birthplace to the hands of the artist who transformed it? Each of these techniques is like turning on a light in a dark room we've only ever felt our way through. They do not give us the stories or the songs, but they provide hard data on the craftsmanship, the use, and the origins of these objects. They transform the carvings from static art pieces into dynamic artifacts with biographies. The investigation is far from over. It is entering a new technological chapter. Every scan and every chemical test is a new line in a conversation with the past, and the Ipiutak, through the silent language of their ivory, may yet have more to say. The legacy of the Ipiutak is not buried in the permafrost. It is carefully preserved under museum lights. If you wish to stand before these strange faces and feel the weight of their gaze, there are places where that conversation across 1,000 years is still ongoing. One of the most significant collections resides at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. Here, in the halls dedicated to the peoples of the Arctic, you can encounter the original carvings recovered by Helge Larsen and Frolit Rainey from Point Hope all those decades ago. To see them is to understand the scale of the discovery. Row upon row of intricate openwork plaques and impossible hybrids, a silent city of ivory. Closer to their homeland, the University of Alaska Museum of the North in Fairbanks holds another vital collection. Here, the artifacts are contextualized within the sweeping story of the Alaskan landscape itself, a reminder that this art sprang from a specific, demanding place. But the story of where these objects belong is evolving in a profoundly important way. For many decades, these cultural treasures were studied and displayed far from the descendants of the land they came from. Today, a powerful movement known as repatriation is changing that narrative. Repatriation is the process of returning culturally significant objects and human remains to their communities of origin. For Alaskan Native communities, this is not just about possession, It is about stewardship, respect, and the right to interpret their own heritage. When a tribe reclaims an Ipiutak carving, it is not locked away, it is often cared for with a deeper, more intimate understanding. Elders and cultural leaders can provide context that no archaeological report ever could, offering insights into symbolic meanings or potential uses that resonate with living traditions. This collaborative shift enriches everyone's understanding. Museums are increasingly partnering with native communities as co-curators, ensuring the stories told on exhibit labels are informed by both science and indigenous knowledge. This partnership acknowledges a vital truth: the Ipiutak are not a vanished people in a distant past. They are part of a continuous human story in the Arctic, and their modern descendants hold a key to that story's meaning. You do not need to board a plane to begin this exploration. Many of these institutions, including the Smithsonian and the University of Alaska, have created extensive digital archives. You can zoom in on high-resolution photographs of a spiral-eyed mask, tracing the tool marks from your own screen. You can examine the delicate openwork of a plaque in detail that would be impossible even standing before the glass case. These online portals are a gift, democratizing access to a wonder that was once hidden in frozen ground. To witness these carvings, whether in person or through a digital surrogate, is to complete a circuit. You are no longer just hearing about a mystery, you are confronting the physical evidence of a lost world's imagination. You can decide for yourself what you see in those inlaid eyes and perhaps feel the faintest echo of the vision that created them. The power of an Ipiutak spiral does not end in a museum case. It spins forward through time, finding new life in the hands of contemporary artists. Across Alaska today, a vibrant renaissance of native art is unfolding, and within it, the ancient visual language of Point Hope is speaking once more. Master carvers working in walrus ivory and whalebone study the old patterns, not to copy them, but to converse with them. You can see the legacy in a modern pendant where the clean, flowing lines of a seal hunter's form are interrupted by a single, perfectly engraved spiral on its shoulder, a direct nod to that ancient symbol of transformation. Printmakers pull ink across stone or paper, creating stark, beautiful images where the silhouettes of ravens and bears are interlocked with the same geometric precision found on a 1,000-year-old openwork plaque. These artists are not replicating artifacts, they are engaging in a cultural continuum, drawing on a deep well of ancestral design to express modern identities and stories. The old motifs become a vocabulary for new narratives, proving that this artistic grammar is not dead but dormant, waiting to be reawakened. This resonance extends far beyond gallery walls. The haunting visage of the Ipiutak mask has become an icon of ancient mystery in popular culture. It stares out from the pages of archaeological textbooks and glossy art history volumes, a symbol of the Arctic's enigmatic past. Documentaries about lost civilizations or shamanic traditions almost invariably feature these carvings, their strange beauty providing a visual shorthand for humanity's deep spiritual connection to the unseen. Perhaps most tellingly, they have fired the imaginations of writers and creators of speculative fiction. In novels and games exploring alternate histories or ancient aliens, the Ipiutak hybrids are sometimes presented as evidence of contact with otherworldly beings or forgotten advanced cultures. While this may stretch historical fact, it underscores a profound truth. These objects are so visually powerful and conceptually alien that they naturally seed stories. They challenge our comfortable categories, demanding explanation and inspiring myth. This journey from sacred object to academic subject to cultural icon is a testament to their enduring pull. What is it about these forms that continues to captivate us centuries after their original meaning faded? It is more than just their mystery. There is a timeless aesthetic power in their balance of elegance and strangeness. The tension between the familiar and the impossible creates a cognitive spark, a feeling that we are looking at a puzzle from a world that operated on different rules. For modern viewers, they tap into a universal fascination with transformation, with the idea that identity is fluid and that other forms of consciousness are possible. They remind us that our ancestors were not primitive, but profound philosophers of the spirit, using the materials at hand to map the contours of existence itself. When a carver today picks up a piece of ivory and lets an ancient spiral guide her tool, she is not just making art, she is completing a circle. She is acknowledging that the vision that shaped a tiny face in the Arctic dark still holds power, still inspires awe, and still asks the most fundamental question art can pose: what worlds are waiting just beyond the edge of our sight? That impulse to carve the impossible is not unique to the frozen north. Scattered across our planet and throughout time, other ancient hands have reached for the same mysterious palette, painting and carving beings that straddle the boundaries of nature. Look at the deep, echoing chambers of European caves from 20,000 years ago. On the walls of the Trois Frères cave in France, there is a famous painting known as the Sorcerer. It depicts a standing figure with the antlers of a stag, the ears of an owl, the tail of a horse, and the legs and genitalia of a human, caught in a dynamic, dancing posture. To the modern eye, it is a surreal hybrid, a close conceptual cousin to the Ipiutak carvings, born from a culture separated by 15,000 years and an entire hemisphere. Archaeologists interpret this, too, as a shamanic image, a portrait of a spiritual practitioner embodying the power of multiple animals during a ritual trance. The similarities are startling, not in style but in fundamental intent. Both cultures, facing utterly different worlds, chose to visualize the supernatural through the same symbolic language of fusion. Journey forward in time to the vast Eurasian steppes, home to the nomadic Scythians around 500 years before the Common Era. These fierce horsemen buried their elite in great mounds called kurgans, and within them they placed stunning gold artifacts. Their art is a whirlwind of transformation. A gold plaque might show a stag, but its antlers twist and curl into the shapes of birds' heads. A belt buckle depicts a predator, perhaps a wolf or a big cat, whose body contorts into a perfect circle, its hindquarters morphing into a stylized griffin's head. This is the animal style, and it pulses with a shamanic energy, showing creatures in the midst of magical change, their bodies fluid and interconnected. Like the Ipiutak, the Scythians were masterful real-world survivors, yet their most valued art depicts a reality in constant, supernatural flux. Then look to the cradle of civilization itself, ancient Mesopotamia. Here scribes wrote of fantastic beasts in their epic myths, and artists gave them form. They created the Lamashu, colossal stone guardians with the body of a bull, the wings of an eagle, and the bearded head of a wise king. They depicted the Moshasu, a serpent dragon with the forelegs of a lion and the hind legs of an eagle. These were not visions from a shaman's trance, but deliberate mythological constructs, composite creatures designed to embody specific divine powers and protect sacred spaces. The method is different, rooted in state religion and mythology rather than personal ecstatic vision, yet the creative engine is related, the human mind assembling a new, more potent being from the symbolic parts of known animals. Placing the Ipiutak within this global gallery does not suggest a hidden connection or a lost global civilization. The distances in time and space are far too great. Instead, it reveals something more profound about us. It highlights a recurring thread in the human story, a deep-seated impulse to give shape to what lies beyond the ordinary. When faced with the vast unknown, whether it is the spirit world, the divine realm, or the mysteries of life and death, cultures independently turn to the same powerful tool, the hybrid. Combining human and animal traits bridges our consciousness with the natural world. Combining multiple animal attributes creates a symbol of supreme power or a master of all realms. This visual language of fusion is a universal human response to the need to explain, to control, or to commune with forces greater than ourselves. The Ipiutak were not an isolated anomaly then, but a brilliant, independent chapter in this grand, cross-cultural story. Their particular genius was to channel this universal impulse through the lens of their specific Arctic reality, using the ivory of the walrus to map a spirit world shaped by ice sea and the long winter night. Their carvings are a local dialect and a global language of the supernatural. Recognizing this does not diminish their mystery, it elevates it. It means that when we stare into the beak-faced mask from Point Hope, we are not just looking at a curious artifact from a forgotten tribe. We are looking into a mirror held up by humanity itself, reflecting our timeless desire to reach beyond what we are, to imagine what we might become, and to give a face to the unseen forces that have always watched us from the dark. The carvings speak of a world rich with spiritual energy, but that energy required a foundation of physical abundance. Could the very climate of the Arctic have been the silent patron of this strange art? Recent science offers a compelling environmental backdrop to the Ipiutak story. By analyzing ancient ice cores, ocean sediments, and preserved pollen, paleoclimatologists have mapped the long, slow heartbeat of the Earth's climate. Their findings suggest that the centuries of Ipiutak flourishing, roughly from 100 years before the Common Era to 800 after, coincided with a fascinating climatic window in the far north. This period sits between two better-known warm phases, the Roman warm period and the later medieval warm period. While the Arctic was never truly warm, evidence points to a prolonged interval of relative stability with slightly milder temperatures and less severe sea ice conditions than the centuries that came before or after. Think of it not as a tropical paradise, but as a reliable rhythm, a predictable pattern of seasons that the Ipiutak could build upon. This environmental stability would have had a direct and powerful impact on the foundation of their society, the sea. A more predictable, slightly less extensive ice pack is a boon for marine life. It creates ideal conditions for the growth of plankton, the tiny organisms that form the base of the ocean's food web. More plankton means more fish, which in turn supports larger populations of the animals the Ipiutak depended on: seals, walrus, and most importantly, the great bowhead whale. With more reliable and abundant hunting, the equation of survival changes. The threat of famine recedes. A single successful whale hunt could feed a community for months, providing a massive surplus of calories. This surplus is the key that unlocks everything else. When you are not fighting for tomorrow's meal, you gain time, you gain energy, you gain the capacity to think beyond mere survival. This is where art is born. A society living on the razor's edge cannot support master carvers who spend months perfecting a single, non-utilitarian ivory plaque. But a society with a reliable food surplus can. It can feed the artist while he works. It can value his spiritual labor as highly as the hunter's physical labor. The slightly warmer, more stable climate likely supported larger, healthier populations of both walrus and people. A larger, more secure population fosters social complexity. It allows for the development of specialized roles, not just hunters and toolmakers, but storytellers, ritual leaders, and visionary artists. Social stability provides the continuity needed for an artistic tradition to deepen over generations, for symbolic motifs to be refined and passed from teacher to apprentice. In this light, the bizarre beauty of the Ipiutak carvings is not just a cultural achievement, it is an ecological signature. Their art becomes a monument carved not only in ivory, but in favorable ocean currents and predictable migrations. It represents the surplus energy of a good season, crystallized into a permanent spiritual form. Their visions of transforming spirits may have been a way to engage with and give thanks to the very forces of nature that provided such abundance. The stability of the climate allowed for the stability of society, which in turn created the mental and physical space to contemplate the unstable, the fluid, the transforming world of the spirits. So we must reframe their mystery. The Ipiutak were not just spiritual geniuses surviving against impossible odds. They were the beneficiaries of a specific, gentle moment in the Arctic's harsh history. Their art was the brilliant flower that bloomed when the long winter eased, just enough for 1,000 years. There is a deep, almost personal ache in looking at these carvings. We feel a connection that defies the vast gulf of centuries, yet we cannot name what it is. They haunt us precisely because they are cryptic messages, delivered with perfect clarity, but in a language we have forgotten. We can see the immense skill in every polished curve, the absolute confidence in the line of a beak or the drill of an eye socket. We can feel the intentionality, the certainty that every detail mattered. But the meaning, the full story they were meant to tell, hovers just beyond our grasp. It is like hearing a beautiful song from another room. The melody is clear and compelling, but the words are muffled into pure emotion. This creates a unique kind of fascination, one that is both intellectual and deeply visceral. They challenge the very categories we use to make sense of the world. Is this object a tool, a toy, or a sacred relic? Is the being it depicts an animal, a person, or a god? Is this art, artifact, or something else entirely? The Ipiutak carvings refuse to sit neatly in our boxes, forcing us to question the boundaries we take for granted. Their beauty is undeniable, a cold, elegant beauty born of ivory and meticulous effort. But it is an eerie beauty, one that unsettles as much as it attracts. They are profoundly alien, visions from a mindset that perceived reality in layers and transformations we can only theorize about. Yet in that very strangeness, they are undeniably and powerfully human. They are the product of hands like ours, minds like ours, wrestling with the same fundamental mysteries of existence, life, death, and what lies beyond the visible world. They use the symbols of their time, the walrus and the bear and the spiral, just as we might use equations or digital code to map the unseen. This emotional resonance is why they captivate us more than a simple stone tool or a broken pot ever could. They are not just relics of how people lived, they are relics of how people dreamed. They remind us that the human imagination has always been our most powerful tool, capable of building not just shelters, but entire spirit worlds. And in their silent ivory language, they ask us a question we are still trying to answer, not about them, but about ourselves. When we look at our own art, our own symbols, what messages are we leaving for a future that may one day find our vision just as beautiful, just as eerie, and just as utterly mysterious? The ivory has been cataloged, the symbols analyzed, yet the deepest questions about the Ipiutak remain stubbornly open. We can describe what they made, but we cannot yet fully reconstruct the world of meaning in which these objects lived. The most fundamental puzzle is the precise ritual use of each carving type. Was the small handheld masket a personal amulet, or was it part of a larger ceremonial costume? Did the intricate openwork plaques hang from a shaman's neck, or were they laid out as maps for a spiritual journey? Without a written record or a living tradition, we are left interpreting the silent wear patterns on the ivory, searching for microscopic residues of pigment or offering that might whisper their purpose. Equally elusive are the meanings of specific composite creatures. Why combine a bear with a whale or a human with a bird of prey? Were these portraits of individual spirit guides known only to a single shaman, or were they widely recognized deities in a shared pantheon? Does a creature with 3 sets of eyes represent a specific guardian of a cosmic realm, or is it a more general symbol of all-seeing power? Each hybrid feels like a character in a lost epic, but the story has been misplaced. The culture's abrupt end around 800 years after the Common Era is another gaping hole in the narrative. Was it a rapidly changing climate that shattered their food web, or did social pressures from new peoples arriving in the region lead to assimilation or conflict? The evidence is frustratingly circumstantial, pointing to possibilities but confirming nothing. Furthermore, the full scope of their world remains blurry. We see the artistic kinship with cultures across the Bering Strait, but what exactly flowed along those trade and contact networks? Was it only finished artworks and raw ivory, or did skilled artisans themselves travel, carrying techniques and myths from one shore to the other? Understanding the scale and nature of this exchange is key to knowing whether the Ipiutak were a singular brilliant spark or one luminous point in a vast interconnected Arctic web of belief. These are not small questions, they are the framework of an entire civilization's identity. Thankfully, the investigation is far from over. Across Alaska today, new archaeological projects are employing tools the original excavators could never have dreamed of. Teams are returning to known sites with ground-penetrating radar to locate unexcavated houses without disturbing a single blade of grass. They are using drones to create highly detailed 3-dimensional maps of entire settlements, revealing patterns of social organization invisible from the ground. In laboratories, scientists are refining techniques to extract ancient proteins and even trace elements from the ivory itself, which could reveal not just what an object was, but what it once held or touched. Perhaps most importantly, there is a growing collaborative effort to weave scientific data with the deep cultural knowledge of Alaska Native communities, whose ancestral memories and oral traditions may hold echoes of these ancient stories. This is the enduring nature of a true historical mystery. Every answered question, from the date of a house to the source of a tusk, inevitably leads to 3 new ones. The Ipiutak Site at Point Hope is not a closed case, but a fertile and active ground for discovery. It stands as an open invitation, not just to archaeologists with trowels and scanners, but to anyone captivated by the human capacity for wonder. It invites a new generation of researchers, storytellers, and simply curious minds to look into those ivory eyes and dare to ask the next question, to listen a little closer to the whispers from the permafrost, and to help piece together the fragments of a vision that has waited over 1,000 years to be seen again. A single piece of walrus ivory rests in the carver's hand, still bearing the curve of the animal's great jaw. This is where the vision becomes real. Let us walk through the steps he might have taken, from dream to object, to feel the convergence of all the mysteries we have explored. The process begins not with a sketch, but with a story. Perhaps the community's shaman returns from a long trance, his eyes still holding the glint of another world. He describes what he encountered: a guardian spirit with the body of a bear, but the head of a walrus, and eyes that were not circles but spirals. The description is not a blueprint, it is an impression, a feeling of power and transformation that must be given a stable form. The master carver listens, not just with his ears, but with his memory, searching his mental library of shapes and symbols for the right way to translate this fleeting vision into enduring ivory. His first critical choice is the material itself. He goes to a cache where raw tusks are stored, seasoned by months in the cool earth. He runs his hands over them, feeling for density, for the right color and grain, for a section free of cracks. He is not selecting a blank canvas, he is choosing the physical vessel that will house a spirit. The tusk is a sacred relic of the hunt, a piece of the walrus's own power, and he must honor that legacy as he transforms it. With a stone saw and abrasive sand, he begins the slow, noisy work of cutting a rough blank from the tusk, a rectangle or a thick slice that will become the openwork plaque. Dust fills the air, the smell of burnt ivory from the friction, mixing with the scent of seal oil lamps in the semi-subterranean workshop. Now the real conversation between artist and material begins. Using a sharp graver, perhaps tipped with a sliver of native copper, he lightly scratches the guiding lines onto the smooth ivory surface. He does not draw the entire creature at once. He might start with the central axis, a spine line, then block out the major forms, the suggestion of a head, the bulk of shoulders. His tools are simple, but his technique is profound. To create the delicate openwork, he uses a bow drill, spinning a sharp point of stone or metal to bore a series of tiny starter holes along the lines of the negative space. Then with a thin blade, he carefully connects these holes, sawing out the intricate patterns with a patience we can scarcely comprehend. One slip, one moment of misplaced pressure, and the fragile lattice could snap, undoing weeks of work. This is not mere craftsmanship, it is a meditation, a physical ritual that matches the spiritual one it commemorates. As the form emerges from the ivory, the artist adds the language of symbols. With a fine engraving tool, he incises the spiral onto the creature's flank, each turn of the line an invocation of motion and change. He drills the small, deep sockets for the eyes, later to be inlaid with jet or contrasting ivory, giving the being a gaze. He adds the dot and circle motifs at the joints, marking them as centers of spiritual pivot. These are not decorations, they are the final instructions, the activation codes written on the form itself. Finally, the carving is finished. He polishes it for hours with a piece of soft leather, until the surface catches the lamplight like frozen moonlight. But it may not have been white. Using a frayed twig or his fingertip, he might then apply pigment, painting the figure with red ochre from the earth or black charcoal from the hearth. The transformation is complete. The spirit described in a vision now has a tangible body, a face that can be seen, held, and addressed. What happens next is the final, mysterious step, the ceremonial activation. Perhaps the shaman takes the newly finished object to a secluded place. He might hold it over the smoke of burning herbs, anoint it with animal fat, or breathe upon it, transferring his own spirit into the form. In that moment, for the Ipiutak, the carving ceases to be a representation. It becomes a point of contact, a conduit. It is a tool for the shaman's future journeys, a teaching device for apprentices, or a protective charm for a hunter. The practical skill of the artist, the spiritual insight of the shaman, and the raw power of the natural world all fuse into one small, cold, astonishingly beautiful thing. This holistic view does not solve the intellectual mystery of what each symbol means, but it solves the human one. It shows us why they did it. They carved these impossible creatures because they believed the impossible was real, and that through skill, reverence, and vision, they could build a bridge to it, one delicate ivory thread at a time. From a frozen metropolis to a gallery of impossible creatures, our journey through the Ipiutak world has been a walk through a dream carved in ivory. We began with the shock of discovery, the vast, orderly city at Point Hope that defied everything we thought we knew about ancient Arctic life. We held a light to the carvings themselves, those unsettling hybrids and abstract forms that seemed to stare back with a consciousness of their own. We followed the trail of theories from the compelling shamanic vision art, where artists recorded journeys into the spirit world, to the idea of a sophisticated symbolic language mapping a fluid, transforming cosmos. We saw the connections across the Bering Strait and felt the weight of the climate that may have nurtured this strange bloom of imagination. Yet after all this, a definitive answer remains just out of reach. The Ipiutak in their silent genius have given us the art but withheld the legend, the precise ritual use of each piece, the full story behind each chimera, the exact reason their vision went dark. These are mysteries still locked in the permafrost. And perhaps that is their final gift to us. The power of these objects lies not in a solved puzzle, but in an enduring question. They stand as a timeless testament to a universal human impulse, the drive to reach beyond the tangible world and give form to the unseen, to use the materials of our survival to build maps of the soul. They remind us that our ancestors were not just survivors, but profound philosophers and visionary artists, capable of creating beauty from the bone of a hunt to explain the universe. Every spiral, every inlaid eye is a message from a distant mind, asking us to wonder, so what do you see when you look at them? Do you see a shaman spirit guide, a character from a lost myth, or a symbol of a world in constant flux? Share your own theories in the comments below. The conversation across the centuries is still alive. If you were captivated by this journey into history's greatest enigmas, be sure to subscribe. There are always more stories waiting, buried in the earth beneath our feet, just waiting for someone to listen.